Hello and welcome to the shop. Today I don't really have a turning project for you, but what I am going to do is preparation for turning projects. I need to do just a little bit of lathe maintenance. I need to clean the bed. I need to make sure the tool rest is smooth and has no nicks on it, and just basically get the lathe cleaned up a little bit so that I'm ready for the projects that I want to do. And I thought I would go ahead and film it, and if this turns out and it looks pretty decent, you'll see it on the channel. If not, no one will ever know this video existed. It'll just be between me and the camera. So let me head over to the lathe and show you what we're going to do today. This is the back side of my lathe table, and you can see I've been doing a little bit of turning. I mean, there's some sandpaper that's been discarded. There's chips all over the place. I've got some bushings out, just a few different tools that need to be put away. And you can see the lathe. I mean, it's full of chips and dust where I've been working, especially right here in front of the lathe. Got some tools over here need to be put away. I'm going to go ahead and get this cleaned up, and then we're going to work on the bed of the lathe. The first thing we want to do is clean off the lathe table, get everything put back where it goes so that we can see what we're up against. And just like that, the lathe table is clean and ready to work on. I did go ahead and remove a couple of the implements while I was working. I'll just get them out of the way so we can focus on the bed. The bed really is not in that bad a shape. There's a little bit of discoloration on it. I'm hoping to be able to take care of some of that. You can kind of see where, I guess, moisture has got on the bed. Here are our tools of choice. We're going to be using 4/0 steel wool, WD-40, some neoprene gloves, and of course, a bunch of paper towels to wipe up when we're finished. I start by checking the bed of the lathe, a little pre-work. Is there any CA glue that's dripped on it? If there is, I'll get like a razor blade and just run it down through there just to get all of that off. But actually, the bed's in pretty decent shape. I cleaned it when I got it, so it's had a little bit of use on it, but nothing too crazy. We're just going to put some WD-40 on there. Whoa. There we go. And we're just going to start working it in. Just using the steel wool and just working it in. Now, some of the discoloration could be a little deep into the metal, and we may not remove it, but we will clean the surface and we will make the surface smoother, and the implements will slide back and forth with much greater ease. In order to get rid of some of the deep marks in the bed, you might have to sand, and I don't like to sand because I'm worried that sanding may take away some of the steel. Even a small amount of steel could cause your tool to not ride properly on the bed of the lathe. So we're just going to clean and see what happens. I've worked the top really well. I'm just going to let the oil set on there. We're going to put some WD on our steel wool, and then I'm going to work on the inside of the way. This will help the implements slide much easier up and down the way. And you may find that some glue or something has run over and got into that area, and it can cause it to bind a little bit. Worked the ways pretty good, both top and inside. Now what I want to do is I'm going to turn my attention to the banjo, and I'm going to shoot a little more WD on my steel wool here, and then I'm just going to work the edge of the banjo, the part that slides on the ways of the lathe. Get a little more WD on there. Just work it the same way you did the ways of the lathe, and the idea is just any rough areas you want to get rid of, any goo that could have got on there from CA or from anything else, friction polish or whatever, you just want to get that cleaned off, give it a nice smooth surface to ride on. This looks pretty good. There's no damage done to it, no dents or anything like that. It's nice and smooth. We're going to do the same thing for our tailstock. You can see it's got a little more wear on it. And the tailstock having a larger surface area like this is probably going to, it's going to crush things under it. You've got pieces of resin that are going to get crushed under it. You've got wood that gets crushed, any CA glue that it runs over. So you just want to really clean this off really good. And be sure to get the side, because this is the part that runs on the inside of the ways of the lathe. So just basically work it really good, just like you did the lathe ways. This part here I'm not as worried about because it doesn't ride on anything, but I'll just give it a quick wipe off, and we'll throw some wax on there just to keep rust down. Now you could take the nut off and you could polish this lock washer. However, it doesn't really slide on the lathe. It pretty much just helps lock the lathe in. So if it's a little rough, and it's on the bottom of the ways anyway, so if it's a little rough, that's not a huge deal. Everything is kind of set for a while I clean the other parts. I'm just going to go ahead and wipe it all down just with a standard paper towel. Get the excess off. Be sure to wipe inside of the ways. Get any excess off. It may have spilled over the edges. Go ahead and wipe that off too, because if there's any of the WD-40 on the lathe, it could cause garbage to stick to the lathe a little more than you wanted to. So it's a good idea to go ahead and wipe everything down really well. You can see the discoloration is still there. I would have needed to probably sand that with sandpaper to get below the surface, because that is probably in the pores of the metal, but it's super smooth. It's not going to hurt anything. I'm inspecting my lathe, and I've got a couple little dings here. They were there when I bought the lathe, but they're below the surface. If I would have felt those popped up, I probably would have got just a tiny bit of sandpaper, maybe some 220 or something, and worked those to where the lathe surface was smooth. But from end to end, it's extremely smooth. Let's get our banjo cleaned off here. And again, if you have a little extra WD that gets on, it's not going to hurt anything other than it could attract grease. I'm sorry, it could attract particles of wood or whatever you happen to be turning, and it can cause binding if it gets inside of the or between the lathe ways and the implements. I don't know what this piece is called right here, what the implement rides on. So just keep everything nice and clean. All right, let's test something out here. Let's pop this tailstock back onto the lathe. Already, look how much easier that slides. Just giving it a push. We haven't even put any wax on there yet, and the wax is just going to protect the surface. What I'm going to do, I've wiped it all down. This rag is pretty nasty. It took a lot of the WD. I'm going to go ahead and get a second, a clean towel. We're going to wipe it again. I don't expect to get much with the second wipe. We got a little bit, but I'm just trying to take as much off as possible. You can really feel a difference already. Yeah, more's coming off than I thought. Take a look at that. The lathe is starting to kind of shine a little bit. That's nice. Wipe our implements off. All right, that looks really nice. I'm just going to use a little crystal clear paste wax. And I'll use a paper towel. Normally I would like to use maybe an old t-shirt or something. I just don't have one handy. Just gonna rub it in, get a nice, just like you were waxing your car, just get a nice coat on there. And we're gonna let it set and haze up. And like I said, be sure to get inside of the ways as well. You want them to have a nice coat of wax on them. This will help the implements slide back and forth on the lathe. But the main reason we're doing the wax job is because we want to protect the surface from water as we're sanding with our micro mesh. And also, it's very humid where I live, and this kind of protects it from the humidity and keeps a layer of surface rust from forming on the lathe. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and do the bottoms of our implements. We flip this paper towel over, get a clean section, and just wax them up. Probably don't want to wax this bolt because that's what you're using to grip the grip the tailstock to the lathe. It comes in under the ways and grips. So if it's a little bit rough, that's probably not going to hurt anything. It's probably going to help it grip. I'm just getting a good coat on there, and I'm going to put a little bit on that flat surface there. Make sure you get where it rides against the ways. You want to get some wax on there. And let's get the banjo now. And I'm being rather liberal with the wax. I mean, there's no sense in skimping. It's not, luckily wax is not expensive, and it's going to make a huge difference. And what I'm going to do is, with all of these wax down, I'm just going to set them aside. We're going to let them set for a while, let that wax haze up. We'll come back and take it off in a minute. Let's turn our attention to something else. This is a device I got from Penn State Industries a while back. There is a link to this in the video description. It's just rubber, and it's got kind of these grooves on it, almost like a drill bit. And you put it into your headstock. It's tapered, just like a number 2 Morse taper. Put it into your headstock, and you turn your headstock, and basically it just cleans everything from inside of the headstock. Now, I do this on a regular basis. I use this sometimes between turnings, you know, if I'm swapping implements, or let's say I take my dead center out and I use a chuck for a while. I'll use this before I put the dead center back in because it cleans the inside of this Morse taper, number 1, and number 2, if there's any debris in there, it could cause your live center to go in at a bit of an angle or even jam in there and become difficult to remove. So it's a good idea to clean once in a while. Do the same thing with the tailstock. And look, the tailstock's quite a bit dirtier. There was quite a bit in there. I'm going to wipe this off, and then I'm going to come back and do it one more time. The tailstock, you're constantly putting in live centers, removing live centers, putting in Jacob's chucks. And see that? Just garbage. We'll do it one more time. I just want to work it until everything is cleaned out of there. It looks much better. All right. While we're waiting for the wax to haze, take a second and check the nut on the bottom of your tailstock as well as the nut on the bottom of your banjo. Make sure they're not loose. You know, you don't want them cranked up on there tight because this needs to be able, when you loosen the handle, you see the nut go up or down. This is how you can tighten this down. So if you put your tailstock on your lathe, let me put it on there, and you tighten your tailstock down, but you notice it kind of moves a little bit, you can give that nut a 1/4 or a 1/2 a turn and tighten it up, and it will help you lock your tailstock. That is the mechanism that presses this washer. Notice that washer has a groove in it to fit in the groove between your ways. It tightens that down in that groove and clamps this to your lathe ways. So check that. You don't want it to be loose. You don't want it to be too tight. Same goes for the banjo. I've put the banjo back on the lathe, and I'm going to use the same implement I used on the headstock and tailstock to clean out inside of the banjo. You know, you don't want your tool rest to go in there and have trouble turning or spinning, so we're just going to clean that out. There's one pass. And this really isn't tapered inside of here, so it doesn't do as good of a job, but it does clean some stuff out of there. Let me adjust my banjo here and lock it down. We're going to put our tool rest in the banjo. Now, while we've got everything off the lathe and we're looking at, feel your banjo. Right here and right here, I can feel that there are some rough spots. I just scraped that off with my finger, so that is probably CA. The other day I was doing a live demo where I was turning Celtic knot blanks and I was putting them together with CA, and the CA I shot it with accelerator, so it had dried on the outside but not all the way on the inside, so I had some on the tool. It looks like I had a little on the headstock as well. I'm sorry, on the tool rest as well, but we're still going to go ahead and clean this. This is a piece of 240 grit sandpaper, and we're just going to lightly sand the top of this. And you're just feeling for any nicks along the way. You don't want to sand hard or with an aggressive piece of paper because you don't want to like dish this out any. But we're just sanding just ever so slightly, and sand the front of it as well. And then feel it with your finger. It should feel nice and smooth. When you're done, I'm just going to take this steel wool and just put some WD-40 on there, just kind of rub it in a little bit, and we're going to let that dry. I also probably will put a little bit of wax on there. Just wipe it off. There we go. Well, that feels nice and smooth. I'll just use my finger, and we're going to wax this up a little bit, which will help our tool slide back and forth on the tool rest. All right, we're going to let these dry for a little bit, and then I'll come back and we'll start cleaning everything up. I've given the wax ample time to dry and haze up, and now I'm just going to take it off with this old t-shirt. Found this in the drawer of my metal lathe. It's a rag that I just use to wipe my hands on when I'm working with the metal lathe and I get mineral oil or whatever on my fingers. Going to wipe the edges off in case any wax came over the edges, but honestly it won't hurt anything if it did. Probably good for it. Now let's get the ways. You can already feel how smooth they are. Make sure we get inside of here. Oh, that's nice. Let's put the banjo on and see how she slides. Look at that. I mean, it just so easily glides over the bed of that lathe. Lock it down. Perfect, perfect. If you lock this down and notice any movement, that nut on the bottom of that washer, you can always give it just, you know, an eighth, a half, or an eighth, a quarter of a turn, and just try a tiny bit at a time. Too much is not good, but you can crank it down to really get it to where you can get a nice tight bite. I think what I'll do now is I don't want to apply any wax to this post, but we're just going to wipe it off. I don't really see anything on it. I mean, we cleaned the inside of here. I really want this to be a little bit rough because that way it'll grip a little easier. But I am going to go ahead and remove the set screw. And the reason why is I'm just going to clean the threads. Notice there's all types of dust in there. Just going to use the old toothbrush. Just clean it off a little bit. And I'm not going to put any lubricant on the tip of it where it presses against the tool rest, you know, because I don't want it to be able to slip. But I don't see anything wrong with putting a little lubricant on the threads. Ooh, made a little bit of a mess there. Okay. Now I'm just going to take the old, there we go, wipe it off with the t-shirt, and we'll restart it. Be very careful when restarting. You don't want to cross thread this, and that's already going in easier. Look at that. I did my best to keep it off the end of the screw. Oh yeah, that's nice. Wow, I like how that slides. Now I'm going to take a look at the headstock, specifically the threads, and they look pretty good. There's no damage on them. I'm not going to put any oil on them because I don't want things slipping off of them, but I am going to clean the threads with this toothbrush just to make sure there's nothing in the threads, because anything that's in those threads can, now I've got something right there. I don't know what that is, but I'm going to get a little a file and get that out. Anything that is in these threads can cause binding. There we go. It's just it's gummy. I don't know what that is. Yeah, it's gone now. But anything that's in those threads can cause binding, and it can cause a chuck to stick on your headstock. You have a hard time getting it off, so just clean those off. And I'm not going to put lubricant on there because I don't want it to be slippery. You know, I want it to be able to grip. But also, while you're working on the headstock, grab the other end of the headstock. Let me slide this down a little bit and move this tailstock out of the way so you can see this. I'm grabbing the other end of the headstock, and I'm lifting up and pushing down, trying to see if I can feel any play in the bearings. And mine, I don't feel any play at all. It feels really nice and tight. I'm going to open the little trap door on the side, and I'm going to open the door on the back. I'm going to inspect the belt. Let me go ahead and get it off of the pulleys so that we can inspect it. We're just going to look at the belt. It's not cracking. I don't see any damage on the belt whatsoever. It looks really good. If you see any damage on the belt, it's a good idea, and I know that was off camera a little bit. I apologize for that. I just realized it, but I just flipped the belt over, and I was looking to see if there's any cracks in it, because as the belt ages and sort of dries out a little bit, that can happen. It looks good on the top, and I just sort of pulled it through and looked at it, you know, along its length. It's a good idea to keep a spare belt with your lathe, because it will never fail that this belt will break at the time you have the most critical thing you've ever worked on to finish. So I have a spare in my cabinet. I recommend you keep a spare in yours. While I'm in here, I'm just looking at the pulleys. They look good and clean. I don't see anything wrong with them. The bottom pulleys, let me spin them. They look good. I'm grabbing the bottom pulley and I'm lifting up on it and moving it to see if there's any play in the bearings in the motor, and I feel none. So I'm really happy about that. All right, let's pull this back into the frame. Pretty much, that's just some basic lathe maintenance. You can get a lot more in depth than that, but that is just some basic maintenance, just to clean the lathe up a little bit and sort of protect it and make sure that, wow, I just love how easy that slides. You're going to love this. I mean, with just some WD-40 and some paste wax, you're going to love what you can do to the bed of your lathe. That is just so nice. But my basic maintenance is finished. Oh, one last thing I do want to look at. A couple of more things I want to test. I've got a dead center and a live center in my lathe. I'm going to bring the tailstock up. They meet perfectly, and I'm going to lock it. Now notice I'm holding the tailstock while I lock it. Let me show you why. That's a perfect alignment. Let me loosen this up. They're lined up perfectly. I'm taking my hand off. I'm locking it. I don't know how well you can see that in the video, but my tailstock, when it locks, shifts forward just a hair, maybe a 32nd of an inch or a 64th of an inch, just a little bit. That's an alignment problem. You don't want that to happen when you turn. And I know the fix for that is just if I put my hand on there and just hold it, it locks perfect every time. So when I set my tailstock, I will always hold it to set it. So make sure they line up. And if they don't line up front to back, you can loosen these screws. There's 4 screws on the headstock, and you can twist this left and right to make it line up. Once they line up, watch what happens when you lock it by holding it and when you lock it by not holding it. And if you have any movement, be sure you register that in your mind, and every time you lock this the same exact way. I know, and it gives me perfect alignment when I do that, so it's a habit for me to hold this and lock it. We are going to do a couple of more things. We need to focus on the tailstock here now. I'm going to pull this back just a little bit. We're going to loosen up, get this live center out of here, and we're going to remove the dead center too. You want to remove this while you're working because, man, that hurts if you hit the back of your hand on it. Now, I'm going to go ahead and twist this all the way out. I'm just winding the tailstock all the way out. All right. Now I'm going to take this set screw out. We're going to bring this out. I'm going to go ahead and take it all the way out because we're going to put some oil on this one just like we did for the banjo. But take a look at that. This is the shaft that ejects and retracts from your tailstock. And it's dirty, right? It's dirty, and it's also got a little damage on there. I'm going to wipe it down real quick. And I'm going to take a look at that damage. I'm going to grab a file, and I'm going to clean that up just a little bit. Just a square file. Just going to run it down through the shaft there just a tiny bit, keeping it flush with the bottom. Now you don't want to sand too far back because that tapers up and you don't want to damage it. But I'm just taking those rough edges off of there. Want to be real gentle. You don't want to remove a ton of material, but I'm just trying to clean that up and make it work smoother. It still looks a little ugly, but it feels really good now. I've got a nice smooth surface. I'm going to go ahead and wax this down. Just use my finger and I'll wax it. Then we're going to set it aside, let the wax dry for a few minutes while I focus on a couple of other things. I'm not going to get anything inside of the groove there because I need that to have a tight fit. Okay, we'll just set it aside here so that can dry for a few minutes. I've got my toothbrush. We're going to go ahead and clean this little set of threads out. The end of that's nice and smooth. It's not damaged. The threads aren't damaged. Everything looks good. I do want to put a little bit of oil, and I'm gonna shoot the oil over the garbage can because you can't see behind me, but my hose for my dust collector is covered in WD-40. Where this is a brand new can. It's really got some pressure. So let me do this over the garbage can. All right, I just shot a little WD on there. Let's work it in a little bit to the threads. I'll go ahead and get this started. We won't push it all the way in because we need to reinsert that the tailstock. Now, another thing I'm going to do while I got this open is I'm going to get a paper towel and I'm going to clean the inside of this. I can see that it looks black in there. Let me get this out of the way. Yeah, that stuff's going everywhere. I'm just going to basically clean this out because there's some gunk in there. The WD will kind of help clean it, and it'll also lubricate it a little bit. But take a look at that. That's just nasty. All right. Now it's a little bit shiny in there. That looks pretty good. Okay, let me take a look at this. How's that doing? It's not quite hazed up yet. We'll give it a couple more minutes. I'll come back and clean that off and we'll get it reassembled. Okay, we're going to wipe the wax off of here. And we'll reinsert it into the tailstock. Once it gets this little indention gets past the set screw here, we can go ahead and drop that into place. That'll keep that from moving. And then we just push it back until it engages with the handle, and we can start. Beautiful. You know, one thing I do want to do, I did not do this. I want to give these screws some lubrication, or these threads on the screw in here some lubrication. So I'm going to use this. Just putting a little WD on the threads inside of there. I'm going to lock this back down. Whoops. There we go. Oh yeah, it turns much easier. Much easier. Just makes operations so much nicer. It's quieter too. Let's lock her down, see what happens. Perfect. All right, I think that brings me to just about the end of the basic maintenance that I'm going to do on my lathe today. I really hope you enjoyed this video. By no means am I claiming to be a lathe expert and saying that this is the end-all be-all of lathe maintenance. This is just some basic stuff that I do about every 6 months to my lathe to keep it operating smoothly and just kind of check it out and make sure there are no issues with belts or bearings or anything like that. Keeping it waxed down, like I mentioned in the video, I live in a very humid environment, and the bed of the lathe, if I don't use it for a while or if I don't keep wax on it, will start to get a little surface rust, and you really don't want that. that. And just trying to keep the lathe in decent shape and keep it operating pleasantly for a little bit longer. So I hope you enjoyed this video. This is just some of my routine. There are plenty of other things you can do. If you feel like leaving those in the comments, some of the tips and tricks that you use to maintain your lathe, please do, because I'm sure others would like to read those and benefit from them. And I wouldn't mind seeing them myself. So thank you for hanging out with me today. I want you to know that you are always welcome in my shop. Come back and see me again real soon, and have a great evening.